Today, I'm going to start asking my questions you can't ask in church. Does the Joshua narrative fit in the Bible? Does it fit where it's placed currently? Does it even fit at all? Now, Joshua is hard to find support in the rest of the Bible. Much of the Old Testament stories have sort of what I call a backup file in the Psalms. There's just no Joshua material in the Psalms, and the Joshua character really literally just exists to be an extension of Moses, doing a lot of the same things, the same miracles, mostly just on a smaller scale. Now, Joshua's first introduction into the text is kind of unusual when you look at it. In Exodus 17, Joshua is just suddenly there. He's not introduced as Joshua, son of Nun, as Moses' aide, Moses' assistant. There's no description here, whereas in all the other books where he first appears, he gets like a proper introduction. What's also odd here that seems to indicate some kind of tampering is that Moses basically leaves a note for Joshua to remember what happened with the Amalekites later. Sort of like saying, oh, hey, when you get to the promised land, remember to get some milk and honey. Oh, and do something about those pesky Amalekites. But what's strange is, when you get to the book of Joshua, there's no mention of that. No Amalekites at all. We don't get that again until we get to 1 Samuel. This is especially odd because, aside from the destruction of 2 cities, the rest of the book of Joshua seems to be just an explanation for why the Israelites didn't fully wipe out the Canaanites. Now then, the big question, Joshua's actual book. This starts out with Joshua, for unexplained reasons, sending 2 more spies into the land of Canaan with this encounter with Rahab. Now, in the book of Numbers, we get a story where Moses sends out 12 spies, and as is commonly put, 10 were bad and 2 were good. However, at that point in the narrative, there is no story about the 2 spies. Moses also changes Joshua's name, which could be an indication that 2 sources were combined here. And then later in Joshua, we get this story where Joshua sends out 2 more spies. But is that really what's happening here? What if this story of these 2 unnamed spies was originally a narrative about the 2 good spies, Joshua and Caleb, and then it just gets moved into the book of Joshua? My working theory here is that the book of Deuteronomy was kind of a disruption to the text in much of the same way that the flood was a disruption to the early chapters of Genesis. Now there, we've got some things that just don't make sense. We've got named locations and rivers that wouldn't exist after a catastrophic flood. And in the same way here, the book of Deuteronomy seems to get dropped at the end of this, and the text doesn't seem to know what to do. The Israelites end up having to wander in the desert for 40 years. Moses has to die before getting into the promised land. And we get this bridge figure in Joshua that continues the Moses narrative while not actually being Moses. This is one of those things that once I see it, it looks pretty obvious and I can't unsee it. But oddly, I don't find much of scholars having written about this. Maybe I'm just not good at finding that. So what do you think? Does Joshua belong here? Is this a disruptive narrative? I'd welcome your comments, and even if you don't have good answers, if you know anybody who might, I would love feedback on this.